Okay. Okay, welcome back. Carolyn here, therapist and thanatologist, and this is part two. We're here with Stephanie Omens. Omens.
Like
Uh,
a like a good omen.
like a good omen. And we're talking about her book, and I love this cover. Drama Therapy in the Bereaved Child, Telling the Truth to Children During Difficult Times. Thank you for coming back, Stephanie.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate this and talking to you.
Great. And as you can see, I loved her book. And I've marked it up, and there's so many great stories in here. And so much great work that you're doing.
Thank you.
And we were actually talking about how I think it's really important, the work that you do. And, this is a great book for clinicians, but it's also great for people to know that there's people like you out there in the world doing this kind of work, working with kids, have experience working with children around death and dying.
Yeah, I think although the book is not a workbook for parents and families, I do write accessibly, and I think it's folks can get something out of it. However, these stories are quite sad, and the situations, of course, are sad. No one wants to think about a young parent dying. I do write in the book, though, that my intention in talking about it and telling those stories is not to make people sad, but to invite the reader to um, expand our awareness around grief and death and dying and a child's grief, and to really hold them. I think about that as I tell a story, or I even, you hear a story or I tell a story, this idea of holding this child, which is just a loving thing to do as a witness.
Mhm. I think parents want more information, or grandparents want more information. I think we have evolved from the time when, kids don't go. I mean, we didn't really talk about this, but let's talk about it for a second. It used to be kids don't go to a funeral. They're we're protecting them, and it's better they don't go. And hopefully, and I think it has evolved from either allowing the kid to make a choice or inviting them in. And I have some thoughts about it, but what are your thoughts?
Well, I would agree with you. However, I still would, in part, I still think there is a big misconception about children not being present and what a child can or cannot understand and what a child can and cannot tolerate. And, I could tell a story about that. Would you?
Please
Yeah.
do.
Yeah. I worked with some children and a family. Unfortunately, very, very sadly, they were twins, and their young mother, she was really in her early 30s, that she died of cancer. And the children, dad had contacted me really basically very early hours in the morning that his wife had died and what to do with the children and these next couple of days. And I said, well, we could meet and I could talk to you about how to prepare them. So we talked about the funeral. I talked about how my body, right, was moving, and my skin was pink, and to touch me, and I was warm, and the children sort of tickled me, and I laughed, and tickled them, and they laughed. And I was laying on the ground, I laid down on the ground, and I made my body, my muscles stiff and rigid. And I said, so when we were playing, I said, well, I was alive. And then I said, well, now I'm dead. Children know the difference in play between real and imaginary. So when I'm lying, playing dead, we all play dead, right? Or kids play dead. So I asked them to touch me. There's discrepancy in that because I'm speaking as we're playing. So I said to touch me, and how do I feel? And they said stiff. Can you move my fingers? No. My body is still warm, but mommy's body will be cold. And her skin, my skin is pinkish, and her skin will be a different color. And she won't move, and she's not eating or sleeping or doing anything, pooping or peeing, because kids talk often about pooping and peeing. And it's funny because as they were doing this, they were kind of around me and playing on the ground, and one of the children farted, and they all laughed, and I laughed, and I said, "Yeah, you're alive, but we don't fart when we're dead." Later that next day, the children, and I explained to Dad other things about bringing someone into the funeral home that could be allocated to watch the children and play with them, and food and games and so forth, and suggested that they bring the children prior to the viewing. It was an open casket. And of course, explain to a child that mommy's body will be in a box, and that box will go into a hole in the ground and covered with earth, and it's called a cemetery. And I use objects and playing with these little toys and putting them so that the child can see through play what's actually happening. But suggested that Dad talk to the funeral home and explain that 30 minutes prior to the viewing would be time just alone with he and the children, so the children could be with mommy's body. And that's what happened. And they did exactly what we had played with, actually. We had rehearsed it in my office. And then they did in the funeral home exactly that. Later, as people came in, the boys ran to the door and they said to family and friends, "Let me show you where mommy's body is." And they would bring people in, ushering people. The funeral director later said that he'd never seen children behave in that way. And what we know is that they had played with it and rehearsed it and felt included as members of the family. And that is essential, to include the children as opposed to exclude them, shield them, and hide them from an experience with which it's their birthright to be involved with their mother and subsequently their mother's memory for the rest of their lives. She belongs to them.
I mean, that was beautiful and illustrated what I was going to say, but you did it so much better. No, I thank you for sharing that. And I did want to just say one other thing, that in play therapy, how you had just talked, sorry, I've got the book here, how you had talked about in play therapy, you played out for them. It sounds like you had little figurines or toys, or showed exactly what was going to happen with models or something the day before, so that they knew what to expect, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And the one distinction I would make is I'm a drama therapist,
Oh,
a licensed creative arts therapist, and play therapy is a certification that is, I don't even know if you have to be a therapist to get a certification in play therapy. But drama therapy is a mastered level licensable profession in the state of New York. And so just to distinguish that. But yes, we play through projective objects using metaphor and story and role and imagination, improvisation, all of those being the tools, essential tools, essential elements in drama and in theater, and the tools of a creative arts therapist or drama therapist specifically, who combines myself, clinical practice, mental health counseling, and those elements of theater. But yeah, and that there's discrepancy in that it's both real and not real. That in that, what I just described to you, the play is masquerading as the truth. And also the discrepant part is that the truth is masquerading as play, which is the essential component in a therapeutic intervention as a drama therapist. As well, and I'll just add this in, which you can edit out if you'd like, but that drama therapy is the intentional use of play towards a therapeutic goal, where play in educational theater or educational, what's it called? It's ed theater, excuse me, or other forms of play, which can be used, that they could be therapeutic. And in my case, that is the therapy. Yeah,
no,
but you're right. Yeah.
Thank you. That's really important. I love that definition. That's really important. So like I said, you said it so much better, and the including the kids versus excluding them is such a key piece. I mean, one of the things that I just say, and like I said, you said it so much better, is that kids are always invited into family events. It's a family thing. We're doing a family thing. A funeral is a family or community event. To exclude a child, particularly when it's their own parent, doesn't go within a culture, our culture, whatever religion, culture, these are all,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, part of life.
Mhm.
People will often say, and you're exactly correct, that it would be sad. I'll say, well, why? What would it mean to have the children there? And they would say, it's sad. And my response is, it, mommy was 32 and died, leaving her husband and young children. That's sad.
Yeah.
That's sad.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. So really important. And I always agree. I always say, I know there's a lot of people think like for teenagers or maybe even middle school, you can let the child decide if they want to go to a funeral or not. Um, I'm a big proponent of kids going to funerals. I don't know why they wouldn't. And I think it's really healthy. But what's your healthy, and as you were saying, for their relationship, for their grieving, right?
100%. And in the story I just told, the boys were asked, do they want to come or do they want to not come? And I will always suggest that the child be included in that decision. However, but with a developmentally appropriate understanding on my part of the child, and preparation, explanation, and an inquiry into any misconceptions that the child has, or questions. So it's through my understanding of child development, what a child can understand, inquiring as to what specifically this child understands, exploring what the misconceptions are, and then clarifying those, and then additionally, right, the next step, or throughout this, they're all interwoven, is playing with and exploring all of the possibilities of what it would be like.
Mhm. Yeah. No, thank you. One thing I often will also say to parents is that kids live so much in the moment. And I've seen kids at a funeral crying, and then they'll see, kids always, little kids, like they're like bigger kids, and they'll see their cousin, their older cousin who's like 10 or whatever, and they're crying and they're like, oh, there's Tommy, or, and then they're like excited to see their cousin. And, the kids' emotions can shift, especially little kids, right there in the moment. I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Well, I would say that children titrate their emotions
Mm.
to a greater degree than we do, where we have a hard time getting into sort of a cognitive discussion or cognitive thought or process. But kids do that, right? They have an ability to change their affect, change emotions, just move between them. And yes, and in the funeral, as I said, like, to have someone, a babysitter or a cousin, in the corner with their iPads and snacks and lovey objects, and the ability to take them home or to the park or wherever they want to go. But you're exactly correct. And I think that's what's powerful too about us as adults and mourners, that we come together and we're able to cry, but also to tell these sweet stories and funny memories. But, um, but exactly as you said, we have to kind of maybe think about it to a degree that kids aren't thinking about it. There's a story in the book, I think it is Brian's story, a brother toy, where when I was working with him when he was very little, I was working with a little boy, which we may talk about. This is 3 at the time when his brother died unexpectedly, older brother. And we would be playing with memories of his sibling. And oftentimes he would look at me with tears in his eyes and he would say, Stephanie, this is too sad. And I'd say, yes, it is. What do you want to, we'll play music or do something else. And we don't have to play with it right now. We can be done for today.
Mhm. Well,
So
yeah, well, let's jump into that story for a minute. I mean, I think that was one that I had like a million like stars next to or something. I thought it was a really important story. I'm just going to it right now. Can we jump into it? Will you give us more? So in the book, it's called Brother Toy,
yeah,
right? So yeah, will you let's go into it. Will you tell us the whole story?
sure. Um, so I do have permission to talk about it. And actually, this little boy who is called Brian in the story, writes about it later as sort of 20 years later, reflects on his own experience as a child with me in therapy. But we can get to that. So they're playing one day, two brothers, younger brother, Brian is 3, and his elder brother is 5. And they're playing a favorite game on the carpet. And all of a sudden, his brother has a sudden and unexpected cardiac event. And his face changes and his body starts to shake. He falls down. Mom and grandma are there, immediately become alarmed. Brian is terrified. He doesn't know what to do. He goes back. And sadly, his brother was not, he did not survive that event and he died. Later, mom brought Brian to therapy. He was unclear what was going on. He was confused. He was scared. And we worked together for quite a while, maybe a year or two. And we told stories about his brother. In the beginning, it was a lot of concrete explanation of what happened and names and naming those things in his language, his 3, drawing pictures, playing in a sandbox. He loved to play in the sandbox, and other interventions that we did together over this period of time. He would talk about how much he missed his brother, and I would say, well, let's go visit him. And in our imagination, we would play taking a rocket ship to the moon, where his brother was on the moon, and there they could play together. And we would enact these games that they played together, some of their favorite games, where I would play his brother and he would be himself, and oftentimes reversing roles, having conversations with his brother. So that in our therapy, he was playing with his brother, um, both the objects that they played with, the toys they played with, and his brother liked the toy that he could manipulate, that he could play with, and they could continue to laugh and have fun. He later, after the therapy, a weekly therapeutic relationship shifted, and there were other times in his life where he would become other milestones that would make him anxious. His underlying had some anxiety. Parents will often say, well, will this affect them? Will they be affected by it? And the answer is yes. There's no way to extract that experience from Brian's life or any other child's life. How they are affected is unknown, right? We don't know, but it's developmental. So therefore it's sewn into their development by very nature of the meaning of that word, right? So he would come back and we would work with whatever was coming up for him. Many years later, because I had the privilege of knowing him and working for over 18 years in the hospital, I had the privilege of working with many people, children, over the course of time, not only the progression of illness, but at times coming back or reaching out, like Brian. Brian contacted me around the time he was 17, 18, applying for college. And he shared with me that he had been admitted to college and he was going to be studying directing and script writing and film, which is really lovely. And he asked me if I would read the essay that he wrote for his college admission. And I was glad to do that. And when I got it and began, was thinking about it, I thought, oh, well, he's going to write about his brother, which is a lovely thing for him to write about. But he didn't. He wrote about our therapy. Wrote a little about me. He wrote about his own memories of what it was like. He wrote about, he said that he learned in therapy how to end things. And I remember at some point asking him, what did he mean? And he said that I would always say in our sessions towards the end, it's time to find an ending. And we're gonna end in a minute. So let's find an ending for today. And that taught him how to end things, he said, and his other friends didn't know how to end things and might get sad or upset or have a hard time transitioning. But he learned that in our therapeutic relationship. He wrote about how important story was to him in remembering his brother and maintaining this relationship with his brother in his life. And that he, knowing the value of story, his work, his intention in college was to tell stories. I don't want to quote him incorrectly, but he says something to the effect of telling stories that are both sad and happy, but his ability to not shy away from them, but to tell them truthfully. So in terms of knowing how their therapy affects children and sort of seeing like, oh, is there validity to the work? Is there, I look to Brian and his story to sort of say, let Brian tell you what it meant to him.
I mean, I thought that was so beautiful and so touching when I read it. I'm almost like getting teary-eyed even now thinking it was just such a, really beautiful, really beautiful. Such a testimony to you and the great work you're doing. And, this long relationship you had with him over these many years. And I love that he, is now going to be a storyteller.
Yeah, and he does that, broadcasted for his college radio show, or I don't know if it was radio show, but doing this work himself, and quite lovely, and was very happy. It submitted his writing to the book. He that was included. His exact essay, I think, is in the book. I don't know if I had edited it or not. I'd have to go look. But is very proud of the book, and read it and shared with me his thoughts. So.
Yeah. So that one was really, really touching. I'm going to go back. Well, actually, for a second, let's talk just a minute about, in the book, you really go through developmental considerations, and, we don't have to go through it in a totally, clinical way, but I do think it's helpful maybe for people out there listening, or for parents, or aunts, uncles, grandparents, whoever. I think that there is something important to know that, you know, kids really understand death and dying in this developmental way. And you've done such a beautiful job of how you talk about, connecting the body when you're working with littler kids. And, but do you think you could just give us an overview of the developmental?
Yeah. Well, I think people, in terms of knowing children and understanding child development, right? These sort of stages, if you were looking at it as stages, but perhaps it's not. I don't think. I look at it as maybe sort of a circular experience rather than a linear one. That's another story. Is that kids, of course, only understand things that are concrete. So only understand the body as it is concretely, seeing, hearing, tasting, playing, only understand what's the shift in mommy's illness, right? Because of what she does for them. So in terms of a younger child, is she picking you up from school? Does she make you peanut butter and jelly sandwiches? If she's not doing those things, right? What are the changes? So understanding through concrete examples. I talk about this in the book in terms of an objective understanding as opposed to a subjective understanding. And that we understand people, some people may talk about the subjective in a spiritual sense. I'm getting off topic, but I'll go back. And children don't have that ability for abstract reasoning or that understanding of like keeping or spirit or soul. Children only understand that dad is coaching their soccer game or not. So keeping things very concrete with kids, really, arguably, I would say that's true even of me, right? Understanding where the person is developmentally in their life based upon concretely what the child gets or doesn't get from their loved one. But then also playing with the subjective understanding of the body. So I always say, like, you know, the daddiness of daddy, right? What are the things, the stories, the games, again, being very concrete about them, but saying, well, you know, is it fun? And where is the fun? So asking about an abstract thing, well, where is the love? Do you know mommy loves you? Do you know daddy loves you? Do you love daddy, mommy? Where is that? Where does that belong in the room? And the child will say, you know, touch their heart or their chest or say, you know, it's inside of me. That's subjective. So children can understand that sort of that element of that feeling and the concrete understanding of the difference between feeling and feeling. I always say there's two kinds of feelings. There's the feeling of being sad, and there's the feeling of me tickling you. So we have two kinds of feelings. That's a concrete understanding of something that's abstract. So giving a child that explanation of the daddiness of daddy. And that for a child, and this is no disrespect to religion, and I will incorporate a family's religious beliefs. However, the subjective is what maybe some adults would call spirit or soul. But to a child, it's really stories and what we could imagine and ways in which we continue to play, like brother toy. How is Brian still playing with that memory? And so that's what I think of when I'm looking at what's the developmental understanding of a child, and really understanding, well, through all the stages, through all the span of the life, right? To understand, what does the child understand concretely about who this person is to them, and what are the subjective ways that they understand the person is to them. So I'm not really talking, I mean, in the book, we could talk about the, you know, 0 to 2 or 3 to 5 or all of that stuff, but it's not dissimilar to what we understand about other developmentalists, but it's kind of the way I think about it.
No, and like you said, we don't have to go through every stage. Though I do think that what you're talking about is probably up until age 7, 8, 9, depending on the kid, right? And then it shifts maybe after that.
What do you mean? What do you mean?
So some of the kind of things that you're saying there, the book of the kind of concrete way that you're interacting. You were saying kind of younger kids.
Right. I'm just trying to think. I'm really thinking here, Caroline, to answer it.
Take your time.
You know, that the play might be different, but
Mhm.
even if I'm working with an adult, because I do
Mhm.
grief and anticipatory grief and work with adults, to think about what are those things that you're mourning or grieving in terms of anticipatory bereavement, anticipatory grief. What are those things? What are those? How are those relationships and my relationship to activities in my daily life changing and shifting? You know, rolling around on the ground, preparing for, you know, me playing dead, I would not be appropriate for a child who's, you know, 12. So very different. And the language I use would be very different. But just, I'm not sure the distinction you mean, but I do work with kids over
Mhm.
7 and under 2. So yeah, I know you're asking for, this is a sort of sidebar, will get cut
Mhm.
out. I know you're asking for something specific, and I want to be able to answer, um, or I think you're asking for something more specific, and I think I'm skirting the issue, or it might sound like I'm avoiding the question.
No, I think that's helpful. Just giving people kind of an idea of, you know, like some of the stories like what you just said with the boys at the funeral, I think that's amazing. And I think that tends to be a little bit younger. You said kind of younger children. I was just kind of defining
Yeah.
what, yeah.
And I'd say for older children or tweenies, that the focus is often on your schoolmates,
Mhm.
who knows, who do you want to know, discussing that in terms of incorporating them back into their social network. Social media is often something with older kids that I really want to focus on, because everything's out there. Who's saying what do you want? How will you feel if, even rehearsing when someone says, I'm so sorry, or I know your dad died, how rehearsing with with an older child, and that, not in that very playful way, but saying, well, what are some things you can respond? What would feel comfortable to you? How do you want that information communicated? Giving the power and the, autonomy and authority to the child. Um, let's see. Also participating in the funeral. Those boys put toys and drawings into their mother's casket, but an older child might want to say something, or speak, maybe even write something that they want to place in the casket with their parent, perhaps. But presented in a more mature way, in keeping with what the child is able to, the way the child wants to be interacted with, or young adult. Yeah.
And I think you said something really important when we're talking about a little bit like tweens or a little bit older kids, that they have a little more control over who they tell or when or that kind of thing. And I just wanted to say, certainly one of the things is peers are much more important at this time. And I don't want to throw shade on a school in New York City, but I do know a school in New York City made an announcement to the entire school when it was a middle school where a kid had a parent who died, and the school just made an announcement to the entire school. And
Yeah,
you know,
yeah, yeah,
yeah, and I was a therapist for another family member, so I didn't have control, but the other family was clear, people were very upset, but the kid was of course the most upset, right?
correct. Yeah, yeah. And sometimes I'm consulted to say, well, what should we say? And I always let the child
Mhm.
choose or discuss or think about, but also to an older child to suggest, to let them know, there won't be things we can control.
Mhm.
People will write things,
Yeah.
people will say things. And also too, this is of parents who think that an older child, doesn't know what's going on in the hospital, or what's going on with the name of, this type of cancer. And I'll say, oh, no, they Googled it 2 seconds ago. They know exactly. And to clarify then any misconceptions they're getting off of the internet. So just to be aware of the role that social media plays. Um, yeah. Or otherwise, Caroline, where teachers or school systems will not say a thing.
Mm.
Right. Brian tells a really interesting story about, you remember this, about the guidance counselor?
Yes, please. Yes, yes, please tell that. I
Yeah,
did. I took a note of it. I wrote, well, I don't want to spoil it.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah. I write about a few guidance counselors in the books who look at
Oh,
surgeons.
it might have been a different one, but I remember one of
Yeah,
them.
yeah, yeah. I think you're talking about the Wings of the Angel, where one of the in a Catholic school told the child to stop crying because her tears would dampen the wings of her brother, and he wouldn't be able to fly to heaven. Which is an interesting thing to tell a child who needs to cry. This little girl was so sad and didn't know how to express their emotions. But Brian had been in class, and I think something else had happened, other child had died or someone had died, and the guidance counselor or teacher or something said to people, this doesn't happen, or it'll never happen, whatever. And Brian sort of raised his hand and said, oh no, my brother died, which promptly got him an invitation to the guidance counselor's office. And he told whatever story or talked to her, and then later got in the car and said to Mom, I need to go to see Miss Stephanie because the guidance counselor just cried and that wasn't helpful.
Yeah.
So when a parent or adults, and this is true of, not inviting a child, not allowing a child to be in the funeral because it's sad, is that parents want to control their own sadness, their own grief by managing or withholding information from the child. So I talk about, what the lie is, and in the book, breaking down the components of the lie as I see it, and then the antidote to, or the from a drama therapeutic standpoint, how I am responding to that in intervention. But yeah, the parent is basically saying, I don't want this to be true. I don't want it to be true that my spouse has a life-limiting condition and will die of this disease. I don't want to admit that. It's too painful. So I will instill in the child a sense of, right, I will lie without malicious intent, but basically we're omitting facts or distorting the truth or lying. And that soothes the adults, because then they can watch the child move around without discussion of the illness or the death. And then therefore, through the child's eyes, I am soothed. I'm less in pain, right? And parents will say, well, they're fine. They're not asking questions. I'm taking a beat and moving in another direction, but we'll say, oh, they don't need to be explained anything because they're doing fine. And I'll say, of course they're doing fine. They're a lovely family. They're going to do fine. But they're not asking the questions because you're not answering anything. You're not talking about it. So the child then is just learning not to talk.
Yeah. Well, and because you've been invited it, you haven't opened up the conversation and said, hey, this is okay. If you want to talk about it, this is an okay topic. You're kind of sending a message. This is not an okay topic. We are not,
Yeah.
We don't talk about this, right?
Right. Which many people, as we know, right, we know we work with adults all the time, say, nobody ever told me, or I didn't know, or I write about an 80 some odd year old, a woman who was a Holocaust survivor, who even at her age today talks about the lies that she was told. It's an interesting story because it's not necessarily about genocide and the Holocaust. It has to do with what happened later, when her father had cancer and subsequently died of cancer. And that lie was the one that really affected her. Not that the Holocaust was not affecting her. We can cut that part out because it's not, because of course it did in her life. But that's what she writes about in the book, or I write about a conversation she and I had.
Yeah. Okay, that's all great. Let's do a quick water. So I wanted to so in chapter 7, which are stories in loving memory, you talk about bodies of culture. Can you define? I don't know. I felt that was just really important. Can you talk about it for a minute?
Well, you steer me in the right direction, but I think of culture, of course, in the ways that we contextualize culture, right? But I also think about culture under the roof in your home. What's the culture around Thanksgiving, right? What's the culture around in this case around illness and death and dying. How do we as a family view these things? And yes, of course, they may be rooted in a larger culture, religious or racial or socioeconomic, many other factors, like not naming them all, but other ways we see culture in a macro sense, right? But I mean it in this micro sense of what words do we use, what words don't we use, how we operate as a family. And that I am curious about that and want to know what words and names and the way a family incorporates religion or what religion means to them. Always asking a parent, what do you call things? And inquiring to what words can I not say? I'm very curious as to what words I can't say. And if those are words such as cancer or death, then I will really explore that from a clinical standpoint and help people to understand why those words are important and euphemisms are truly unhelpful for children. Was that really what you were referring to in terms of? Yeah.
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 It reminds me when I work with adults, and my training in hospice is we really do a biopsychosocial, spiritual, financial, and cultural and religion. And it's how we work with people and with children, it's different. You're not going to say biopsychosocial, obviously, but it's like, you have to know, like you said, with this family, whether it's with a child or an adult, what is, like you said, the culture for that family, right?
Right. It's exactly what you said. It's exactly what you described. But I think about it in a more, I don't, yes, it's exactly that. One thing, I guess an example of this would be during a religious service, right? During any religious service in church or temple or mosque or wherever. And everybody may be reciting the exact same prayer or singing the same song. Every different all the congregants are singing one song or saying one prayer. But if we went in and asked each congregant what that prayer or song meant to them, we'd have 100 different answers because it's specific, right? So there's even the culture within oneself, right? Yeah.
Absolutely. And I don't want to go too much off, but I was sometimes I work with a lot of 20 somethings, and often the that first gen 20 something, mom or dad are from their home country. And I mean, sometimes it's a hard place to be when you're first gen and, these kids, listen to Taylor Swift, whatever, I don't know. But in some ways, they're very American. And then when someone dies, their culture and and so the parents are bringing things in from their home country. And, these kids are like, I grew up here. And, I say sometimes there's, a little bit of dissonance between, so like you said, it's, I have that culture and I know it, but I also kind of grew up, so what does that mean for them? Right.
And just like, yes, and parents who want to, or grandparents who want to instill in others, right, of a younger generation or for the children, instill within them their own beliefs, their own feelings, which may be actually not congruent with the child. And even with grief, right? A parent will say, don't look at that, don't watch, don't look, don't see, maybe, and it's okay if perhaps that adult doesn't want to look or see or watch. The adult might not like to go into the room in the hospital and be with an active phase of dying, the loved one actively dying. They choose to be outside of the room because that's not where they are emotionally, or that's not something that they want to be with. And yet the child does want to be with mommy's body and does really want to invite them to, if they choose, to lie with mommy. And in many cases, and I write about this as well, where I will stage that or help support the child to be near the body of their parent, which makes the nurses and the doctors, it's very upsetting for them. But it's not upsetting for me to bring a child in the cuddle of their parent, even when their parent couldn't, wrap their arms around them. But children will often want to lay in bed, and I'll put the side rail down on the hospital bed and move the chairs closer, and with the help of the nurse, move things around, put pillows around so that the child can lie with their mother. And I'll help to move mommy's arms so she can be holding her child. And so in that embrace, even though she's not able to lift her arm and hold this child, but I can trust that, using a mother's heart, right, for myself, that that's what she would want to do, is embrace her child.
Yeah.
And that's a moment that can't be, you can't get back, right? This last time that you laid with your mother, the last time you felt her warm body and her hand on around you.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
so it's important to provide that, to give them at least the opportunity.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. No, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. I'm going back to the book. No, thank you. Well, there was another story, and I don't know, Emily. This was the one about the unholding of Emily.
Yeah.
And then I wrote poem next to it.
Call it
Poem?
poem.
Yeah. Why did I write that? I don't know.
I don't know.
What do you want to talk about that for a moment?
Yeah. Well, Emily's mother writes in the book. Emily's mother writes a story, writes her a telling of several people wrote their own reflections about the therapy, and those are included in the book. And Emily's mother wrote something as well. So there's no, I'm not, and all the names have been changed. And oftentimes in the stories, in the book, I've changed the genders or,
the parent who.
yeah, yes. And everyone who I write about, it's important to say, consent was given and permission granted to tell that story. So I worked with Emily's brother for quite some time. Emily sadly was born with a rare life-limiting congenital disease, abnormality. And it was known that it was not life. She could not live with this illness, with this congenital abnormality. It would take her life. And was known. There was no ambiguity around that. So in working with that family, it was clear to the parents that something would need to be explained to her older brother. And we worked together for quite some time, and throughout the phases of his sister's developmental changes, we would play with that and allow him to participate. He wrote this beautiful, maybe this is what you're referring to, I'm not sure, but he wrote this beautiful sort of script written by his sister, in her first person, but by him. And he had this on the, I'll just say the stroller for all intents and purposes, but because there was oxygen and there were other things in this, the way that the family would move her about. And it was really written by her. Hello, my name is, I like this, I am this, don't be afraid of this, I eat in this way. And he really wrote how he wanted people to see her as a real person. And so that was important to him. But the story really goes around the active phase of her death, this sort of 12 hours where she was actively dying. And it was agreed that I would go. Mom wanted me to to be there. The parents wanted me to be there. The brother was not there. That was not planned, or nor would it have been what I would have recommended in those final hours. And I went to their room where Mom was sitting up and Emily was on her lap. Mom had her arms around her and was just sitting. They were leaning, Mommy's tummy and Emily's back. Mom was stroking her hair and being with her just quietly. And the doctors and nurses, as well as myself and the therapist for the parents, came in and out, allowing them to have time together. And she held her just for hours in her lap, so cocooned by her, Emily was between her legs, so kind of cocooned in this way. And it's quite similar, it struck me, to the way Emily was in utero, right, against Mommy's tummy, really held so tightly. And as there's another bit of the story about the finger painting. Do you want me to tell that bit?
Yeah, please.
Yeah. So one thing that Emily and her, and Mom did, that was an activity, is that Emily would enjoy finger painting. And so Mom would take her hand and gently dip her finger into different colors and then help guide her hand across a page so that she could paint. And this was something that Mom really enjoyed doing with her daughter. And so in those final hours, I asked Mom, did she want to do some painting with Emily? Mom writes in this story that she thought I was crazy. What is she saying? What am I saying? But she agreed, and I brought in the paints, and we made these with Emily. Mom made, and I helped, these balsa wood boxes with lids, right? Like containers. And Emily and Mom made several, one for each sibling and one for her. And also, a hand painting, right? So I painted Emily's hand and then brought a canvas board towards it so that Emily's handprints were on this painting or painted board chosen in a color that Mom chose as her favorite color. Later, hours later, when Emily died, Mom continued to hold her like that for hours. Really just the three of them. We would peek in, inquiring as to when Mom might want to leave and transition Emily's body towards the next phase. And I was aware that Mom had sat there for hours and had not gotten up to go to the bathroom and had not eaten. Just sat there because her body was essential, that her body was functioning with Emily and Emily's body was functioning with her. When it was time, though, for Emily's body to be transitioned towards, the morgue in the basement of the hospital, and then eventually to the funeral home, Mom gently, or Dad was sitting beside her, and he gently slipped his hands under his daughter and gently brought her to his body. Sort of slow and gentle transition. And then Dad picked up his daughter and placed her on a singular stretcher, which would be transported. And they left the hospital. Mom called me the next day. I saw the sibling in a session to prepare him, like I had the other children that I described earlier. And Mom wrote she spoke to us directly, to myself, as to few of the doctors, the therapists that had worked with her, and invited us, if we would be pallbearers at the funeral. And when the service was finished, we all, those of us clinicians who had worked with the family, stood by the coffin and walked out towards the graveside where Emily's body was placed into the ground. And I was so moved by this unholding of her, this very gentle way in which she was held, first in her own mother's body, in utero, and then very slowly through her life. And in her death, then to be held once again in this slow way in which she was unheld. And that's the story of the unholding of Emily.
It's beautiful. I mean, that it's very sad and really, really beautiful. And so touching that mom asked all of you to be the pallbearers. I mean, that's like,
it's very moving and very meaningful. And I should say, in the course of my work, I don't go to many funerals. I mean, I could name on less than one hand of, if it's 3 or 4 in my over 20 years of working, it's not a common practice. Like all clinicians or clinicians who work with death and dying, if the therapeutic work is done in the therapeutic context, then that's the work. And unless my presence would be a very, very clear therapeutic intervention at a funeral, such as I discussed with Emily, that would be the choice that I would make through supervision and discussion and thoughts about my involvement. But I'm just honored to have been a part of that unholding, a part of her life, the holding of and the unholding of. Yeah.
No, that's really beautiful. And I have a similar experience. I mean, I was only 8 years in hospice, but I probably went to like 4 or 5 funerals as well. It's just, it's not a regular practice.
I think as a therapist, in this work, which I'm sorry to interrupt you, but in terms of our own boundaries and what that would mean to do this work and the ability to hold for myself, right? My own experiences with death and dying, my own experiences and feelings, and yet to be very articulate in moving back and forth between that sort of permeable boundary between not too rigid and distanced from the experience that I'm involved in with the family, nor over involved, or a mesh, this sort of a mesh, creating what a drama therapist, Robert Landy, speaks about aesthetic distance, not either over or under distanced, to just sort of find that balance. And it's not rigid. It's permeable, it moves like a wave. A slow, gentle wave, little ripples.
No, that's a really, really beautiful way of putting it. Yeah. Well, I was wondering if you would talk a little bit about playing with the death of a parent, Stephen and Paula's story. That's what mommies do.
Yeah. I'm trying to just pause for just a second. Do you mean that first story? No, that's Sharon's story. What do mommies do? Just remind me what story that is.
She was a successful lawyer with a 6-year-old.
Oh God, thank you. Oh,
It sounds like she might have been a single.
No. I got it. I know exactly. I just wanted to make sure. I was like, wait a minute. Do I know my own story?
No, that's okay. There's so many.
Also, too, Caroline, I changed the names of everyone. So
of course. No, trust me, I get that.
And when I say Brian's story, I have to really think hard about what's come out of my mouth. So Stephen and
Paula,
thank you.
that's okay. I get it.
Yeah. Well, Paula was extraordinary in that she knew she had a life-limiting illness. She knew that she could not survive living with the cancer for past a certain amount of time, that the cancer would take her life. And she had a young child And she contacted me and she said, I need your help, she stated, to work with my child. And my sister, she said, will be caring for my son after my death. And my sister won't be able to handle it. She won't be able to do it. Okay. So I need your help. And I met her and I worked with her and Stephen for a few months. Her life was, I don't know, from the time I spoke to her until she died was be a year-ish. And I worked with him a few times talking about mom's illness, and then concretely or objectively what was changing. Concretely and very objectively what she could and couldn't do, and how that was what was affecting her body. It was cancer, and the cancer was hurting her body, first in her lung, and then in her leg, and then in her tummy, and then in her brain, and how that was moving. Right. I think Stephen said to me something really beautifully as we were working through at some point during these months, and as we were talking about it, all of a sudden his eyes lit up. It was like that. It was like a light bulb went off, and he looked at me and he said, "Oh, I get it. Mommy's heart is pumping blood, and the blood is moving through her body, and the cancer is moving to other places in her body. I get it." I said, "Yeah, you do get it." Get it. And he got it because the information was scaffolded. Because I explained enough information that it wasn't too much or too little, that along the way it would be, he could understand it, a child could grasp it. But over the course of my work with him, mommy got ill, more sick, and she died. And the night of her death, her sister and uncle, who would take custody of him and raise him, and brought him to me to explain what had happened. And we talked, and Stephen was sitting on his auntie's lap, right? At that time, now she's his mother. Sat on his aunt's lap, and I was sitting there with his uncle. Maybe actually I'm wrong. He was sitting in his uncle's lap, if I'm correct, or I don't remember what I wrote about. So sometimes I write about things, and then but the truth stays in my mind so vividly. So I'll just tell it as it was, which is he was sitting in his uncle's lap. Mom was, his aunt was beside him, and I was looking at him. And as we discussed what had happened, and I said, and mom died. And I always just let that sit. I'm not too quick to say anything else. And I'm also very mindful to explain to the parents why, we say nothing. Because the child is waiting for us to change our minds or to make it not true. But I can't. So I said that mom had died, and the tears, he looked around to see if we did look, right? The kids will look to say, like, are you really? Are you serious? And again, it was like his eyes widened and a light bulb went off. He understood. And he started crying, and the tears just rolling down his face, and his nose was running, and he was crying. And he said, but who will be my mommy? And his hand, she reached for a tissue, she brought it to his nose, and she wiped his face. And I said, your aunt will be your mommy. Because that's what mommies do. They wipe your nose and they kiss away your tears when you're sad. And they both had the same mommy. Grandma taught them both how to be mommies. And that's what mommies do.
I know, I'm getting teary. I mean, it's really a beautiful, sad but beautiful story. Really, really beautiful.
Story. And he's a happy, happy teenager, right on the verge of graduation. And so are his siblings. And his parents are amazing. And he's an amazing child and knows that he has two mommies. A mommy who raises him and his mommy who died.
No, it's really beautiful. Really, really beautiful. Yeah. Well, do you have time for,
I do.
okay, it's 3:17, so I do want to be mindful of the time. And we talked about that one. Maybe we could just do, well, there were two more that I really thought were,
Can I get some water?
yes, please do, please, please.
Okay, thank you. Thanks so much. Okay, okay. Is this all okay? Is this good? Is this all good?
No, it's great. It's great. I'm just trying to,
Tell me which one and
so there were three more, and I don't know, there was, bubbles or magic. Michael began noticing he was losing his balance, then he read that one. And then I also thought the one, a familiar gesture one last time where you talked about in the space between death and life, they were able to be there with their father in a familiar way one last time. I don't know what about bubbles I thought was, I didn't really underline anything, but I put a star next to it.
That's about, I think, using the bubbles to bring the child's face close to daddy so that daddy could kiss him because the child was afraid.
Okay, that's a good, okay. And then, I don't know, wait, I forget the story of David as told by his mother, walking into intensive care. Oh, wait, this was a mom talking about her child dying. Is that?
Yeah, that's in the NICU. Yep. Yep. What do you want me to talk about that?
No, let's go back to, now I'm forgetting. Wait, so bubbles or magic was,
Michael and
okay.
the babe and a little boy sitting on his mommy's hip, and he's scared. And I write these letters for daddy. Daddy tells me all these developmental milestones, and I write these little greeting cards that I give to mommy. And they tell the story. They tell those, like, they talk for each other. Like, she talks for him and he talks for her when each of them get overwhelmed.
So so let's do that one. And then the father was dying and the nurse in ICU called me. He wanted her to bring the girls to say goodbye. So these two are these two I think are both good. A familiar gesture one last time, or bubbles or magic.
Yeah. Okay. I don't want to tell too much of each story. Or if you want me to read one or whatever, I don't know.
For some reason, I just loved the familiar gesture, like that one. I mean, maybe I can just read in the space between death and life, and you could talk about that for like a minute.
Sure.
And then maybe you can do bubbles or magic, and then we'll wrap up. Is that okay?
Sure, perfect.
Okay. So, okay, there was one other story, a familiar gesture one last time, and you had written something so beautiful and powerful. In the space between death and life, they were able to be with their father in a familiar way one last time. So beautiful. And, I think many people will find that really just a beautiful thing to hear. And it just reminded me of my time in hospice, when I worked with so many people in the space between death and life. And I think I guess for me, I remember seeing this so often in my work in hospice, seeing someone in that liminal space might be the word sometimes people use. And, I think it's hard for adults, but it's really hard for a child. So maybe you could just talk about the story for a minute.
Yeah. So this was a story about two little girls whose father was in an active phase of dying, active phase of death. And the mom wanted to bring them to see their dad in what she knew would be the last time that they would see him in physical body. And the girls, we talked about it, like I have explained, prior to going in, and an invitation, did they want to go or not go? And we walked in, and they slowly approached because daddy wasn't doing the daddiness of daddy. He wasn't greeting them or, speaking to them in the way that was familiar. And in my work with them, inquired, what does daddy do that's so special about him? And they explained that they were a deeply religious, a Catholic family, and that dad would bless them often. And he would make the sign of the cross, the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, and he would kiss them. And that was a familiar thing that happened daily. While we were together with dad, I helped to take daddy's hand and to move daddy's hand in the sign of the cross, as he would generally or typically do. They were a Spanish-speaking family, so I had mom recite those words on behalf of her husband. And in that moment, the girls were able to be with their daddy in the daddiness of daddy, that special, special place, right? Or thing, gesture, but also that special place. And I love the word liminal or liminality, because I think of the acrobat, and the acrobat is hanging on to the trapeze bar, and across the trampoline is another bar. And as the acrobat is flying through the air, they know that the bar is there. They have to release to reach out and grab that bar, with a knowing that they might not catch it. The trust and vulnerability of the space between hanging on and letting go. To me, that space between is the liminal space. And as therapists, or the work we do, I discuss as in that place of liminality.
That's such a beautiful way of describing it. That's real. Oh, thank you for that gift. That's really, it's a word I use or clinicians use, but your description of it is really, really a beautiful metaphor. Really
Mm.
beautiful.
I think as a drama therapist, that's the way I write. That's the way I work in telling stories in a way, or using words, right? What's liminality? Right? It's a word we understand, right? Look it up. New now, like I was going to say Webster's, but we don't have that. AI will tell us exactly what it means, right? but what does it really mean? It's abstract. So for a child, right? Well, I wouldn't use the word liminality, but I would, play with what is that abstract concept of daddy being both the daddiness of daddy living on, right? But daddy not being able to make that gesture in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. but there is a space between.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, thank you. Well, for our last story, I loved this Bubbles Are Magic. And this was, you said Michael began noticing he was losing his balance. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
It was a beautiful young couple. And what she explained was that they weren't sure what was wrong at first, but there was a progression of a change, a shift in his neurological functions. He had a brain tumor. And when they went finally to address this balance, and then later a speech issue, and there was some visual changes that brought them to the doctor, and then subsequently to the neurologist's office, and MRIs and CAT scans and tests. And we're told that Dad had advanced brain cancer, and he would a tumor. And although they could possibly do an operation, that it would not change the course and the trajectory of the life-limiting condition. And he was a young man. They were expecting their second child. The little boy was, I think, 3. And Mom asked me to work with them when I brought this child to see. Well, first, actually, there's a first part of the story, is that meeting with both Michael and his wife, I pause always because I'm just afraid of what's going to come out of my mouth. That we talked about the kids, and we talked about his sadness and his grief, and he talked about how he just had these hopes for the children, and they knew they were expecting their second son, and what he'd wanted to do with the children, and how he was just so grief-stricken to not be able to be there for the birth of their child. And I asked him some prompts, some very specific prompts, like, what would you want to say to the boys when they, when they graduate from kindergarten? What would you want to say to them when you're coaching their little league team and they don't really, they strike out? What would you want to tell them when, they're bullied and someone doesn't want to play with them? What would you want to tell your eldest son when he's mad at his baby brother for knocking things down? I went through some specific phases when they have their first, when they drive the car, or they have their first girlfriend, or graduate from college, or get married. What would you want to say? And as he was talking, I wrote things down. And sometimes he would become overwhelmed, and his wife would answer for him. And sometimes she would become overwhelmed and he would answer for her. They were incredibly in sync, and it was very clear, very much in love with one another. There was a time, though, when Michael was dying, and it was the opportunity to bring their son one last time to be with Daddy. I met them and took them down the hall to see Daddy. And I was holding his hand. I described that he's wearing these pumpkin jack-o'-lantern pajamas. Even it was like November or December or January. It's far past Halloween, but he wouldn't take them off, she told me. And she couldn't wash them. So she described how she had to buy another pair because it was all he wanted to wear, the little jammies. So we walked down the hall together. The nurses at the nurses' station turned away. They were very sad. We proceeded towards the room where Daddy was. He had a mask. He was wearing a mask for oxygen. He was very weak, but his eyes came bright as his son walked in the room. The little boy though was frightened. Immediately I could see him withdraw, and could feel a sense of hesitancy, or what I just called fear. Daddy wasn't doing what Daddy should be doing. And there were lots of tubes and hospital room, and it's very unfamiliar to him. Mom picked him up and scooped him up and brought him to the bedside and said, kiss your daddy, give your daddy a kiss, not in a loving way. And he turned away and he was sort of itchy, wanted to get out of her arms. She has this big belly, mind you, and he's perched on her hip. He becomes distracted though by this balloon in the corner, a helium balloon that's sort of kind of wilted, sad little balloon up in the corner, and he's interested in that. And Dad and Mom are distressed that he won't come closer. In my pocket, though, I had a little jar of bubbles, and I took them out and I started blowing them in the direction of the balloon. And he was excited and engaged with those bubbles, sort of looking at them. And I sang a little song that I know about popping bubbles. And we were popping, pop, 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 the bubbles. I slowly turned towards Michael, and he slowly turned, orienting himself towards his father. And I blew the bubbles over Michael's face. And slowly, so he would find, he had to lean close to Michael. At that moment, Michael took the mask off his face because his son was close enough to him to give him a kiss on the cheek. And I thought in that moment, how the magic of those bubbles, the game, right, to play, providing them this really beautiful and magical moment.
And that is really touching. Really, really, really touching.
Yeah. I think to myself though, Carolyn, what compels me to do the work, what I feel drawn towards it is, what if that didn't happen? What if in all the cases that we described, nothing, that didn't happen? Nothing happened. That's where the trauma lies. Because trauma, as we see it as therapists, right? We talk about the big T and little t traumas, right? The trauma is the stuff that's done to us. And you can see it, it's physical, right? It's a bruise or a cut or malnutrition, or sexual trauma. But the little t traumas are what wasn't done to us, what wasn't given to us, what didn't happen. So I'm not re-traumatizing a child. I'm in fact sort of suggesting, no, we're going to provide something that is, in fact, it's not trauma. It's the opposite of that, I would say. If it is done clinically, mindfully, with experience, I don't question my interventions. People will look at me like, well, maybe I'm going to change my mind. I'm like, no, I'm clear. I know exactly what I'm doing. And, if I were to push, if I were to force, if I were to, manipulate in some way, then yes, of course, harm could be done. But that's true of us all as therapists. But if we're listening, truly listening, I believe strongly that I'm providing them what otherwise wouldn't be done. And that is devastating to me. Yeah.
I mean, I couldn't agree more. And I know I talked in our other episode of how I get, as you said, if we don't have those interventions, I feel in their 20s and 30s, those are the clients that I get, who didn't get those interventions. And, I know I said this, I want more people like you and more people doing that work to support kids at that time, right? I think it's just so important. I think it's so important.
Yeah, and what I'll say to that is that will require funding, legislation, and training, education. And that does not exist. Is it, I write about these kids are forgotten. This is this grossly underserved population where there is no funding or legislation, funding, and then training. Therapists are not trained They might be, and doctors and nurses, right? They might be given one lecture in palliative care, right? Or grief. Certainly as therapists, right? I don't know if you went through your grad training and got maybe a chapter in a book or a lecture, but not even a course or even an entire degree. Thanatology, of course, being a certification that is extensive on a postgraduate level, and you have done this training. However, in pediatrics for children, it doesn't exist.
Yeah. Yeah.
And do that, well, that's why I wrote the book in part, is it's important to tell their stories.
I agree. And I even, I love thanatology, and it's my, but kids are not really that much included. And in my training, I did, I think, only one all-day training, which was amazing. I also feel that, I think I mentioned to you, one hospice I worked at had a child life specialist, who was amazing. And there needs to be more funding for that, who really works specifically with the children. I'm a social worker. Social workers are great. I think it was really helpful, though, to have the child life specialist who could really get in there and do this work, and really knew, I feel confident often talking to parents, but working with the kids, I think it's just wonderful to have someone who really does that.
Yeah. And I think that's true in all families that we would work with. As a therapist, you wouldn't both work with the father and then decide to also provide therapy for their son, right? Unless it was family therapy, but you wouldn't, as an individual therapist, right, do that. And then, yes, in the hospital, for me to be specifically allocated for the needs of the child, while the other therapist who, was in charge specifically for perhaps the patient and or the caregiver, but that's very different. And the parent and the identified patient, as well as the primary caregiver, have completely different needs than that of the child. And oftentimes they're in direct conflict, which is super hard. They want to be involved in everything. They want to talk about everything. And yet the identified patient and the caregiver don't. It's upsetting to them. They don't want to speak about things. That's okay. But the child does. And they can talk to me. I'm okay. I'm okay. I like to talk about it.
Well, thank you so much. So that was a good omen story, right?
Yeah. Yes. And I always write, the end for now. So, and it's only the end for now. The stories stories continue to live on.
I love that. The end for now.
The end for now.
Well, thank you so much. We'll do a look at this. You can, I really loved your book. It was really, your writing is so beautiful. The stories are so beautiful, and you have so much clarity, and you brought so many things that I knew, or even when we were talking about liminal, but you really brought it to another level. So I just loved it. I think it was just beautifully written, beautifully, the word clarity comes to my mind. So thank you so much.
I want to thank you so much for reading the book and for taking interest and reading it, and putting all these Post-it notes. I'm so honored and inviting me to have the conversation with you, because it's really been fun. Nice, fun. I like it. Good. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And this will conclude. What did you say? What do we like to say?
For now.
The end for now. And this is the end for now.
Yeah.
Thank you again, Stephanie.
Thank you.
Bye.
Are we hanging up now?
Oh, okay, there we go.
Okay, good. So, thank you.
Yeah, so I would, like I said, if you have any slides to send me, I think you have my email address, but I can resend it to you if you want it.
Yeah, I have a beautiful slide on liminality, that shows that image. I have another slide for the end for now. And I have some other slides. I have a really great one, I think, from a conference I did in April, but the slide is the slide says playing dead, and it's a little dog with its feet in the air, and I'm lying on the ground like this. So it's really funny. I love that slide. So there's that one, and then there's so many slides in the PowerPoint. I'm not sure what to share with you, but I'll look through and see. I have many PowerPoints for many different conferences, but I'll try to find one.
That's amazing. No, that would be amazing. Please send me, and if you send me, it's up to you. I want you to feel comfortable, but I can go through them, or my intern will go through them. But
You
any
need a whole presentation. I don't know if I want to send you a whole presentation, but I don't.
might be
Lots of
too much. That might be too much. Yeah.
They're also different. Let me I'll go through them and see which ones you think that would be like the dead one, and the liminality, and the end for now is a footprint on a beach, and the wave is gonna, it says the end for now. It says the end for now in the slide, and it's a picture of a print on the sand, and the ocean is, the wave is gonna just, it's gonna come up and wash it away.
That's perfect. I mean, and I'm just looking through. I mean, that would be wonderful. We would love to have that.
Well, you have the stories, the bespoke books. Those are the bespoke books that I write.
Oh, is that on your website? Or
Well, you aren't going to get it on the website. Where you're going to get it is if you want an actual copy of one of the books, you can get it through the Rutledge. You can get it. Let me find it. Rutledge website, if you have 2 seconds.
yeah. Definitely.
Yeah. You go to the Rutledge website. I'll give it to you here.
Okay.
You go under. Go to the Rutledge website, and you go under, what is it called? Supporting material. No. It's biography, critics review, supporting material. Yeah, if you go under this, you will be able to click on the PDFs of 2 stories. And one is just a basic story called Everything Changes, and the other happens to be, where are you? Did I lose you?
No, I'm here.
The other happens to be called Steffi's story, which I write a little about my own story in the book.
You did, yeah.
Yeah. And throughout this process, one of my mentors and colleagues said, "Oh, you need to write your own book, Steffi's story." Because I write it's like Sam's story, and I talk about this, right? Clearly enough.
Yeah.
Sam's story, Melanie's story, Caroline's story, and their specific stories. But she said, write Steffi's story. So I did write Steffi's story, so you can read that if you want, but.
Okay. So we'll look, okay, so it's on the Rutledge website.
I'll send it in a link.
Okay, great. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm just looking through here to see if there were any, do you have a logo for your
Yeah, sure.
No White Lies that you want to send me separately?
Yeah, I have a logo.
If you want to send that, we could always cut to that too.
And then I do have a QR code if you're interested in the QR code for Amazon and/or Rutledge. If folks want to buy it, that's where they would buy it.
Great idea. Yeah, that's a really, really great idea.
Yeah.
Please.
So,
But
I think, Caroline, I'll try to just, okay. Anyway, all right. I'm like getting distracted by myself trying to give you a bunch of shit, but I'll try to, I'll do that.
Like visual things you think might be interesting. I mean, of course, any materials, if you have the QR and even just your logo, because when we talk about it, we could even, cut it in and something that would be great. I'd be happy to,
The podcast, is it going to be visual?
So, I mean, because it's going to be it is our voices, but I've recorded this. So she can edit this over this if people want to watch it on YouTube.
Okay. I look like shit, but that's okay.
I mean, are you okay? You don't, you look great.
It's fine. It's fine. I'm laughing because it's fine. No, there might be clips. If she doesn't mind, would I be able to steal like 30 seconds of something that I could post on my website?
Absolutely, absolutely. We
I
would
mean,
love,
obviously I'll put the link on, but I mean, I would love to just, if I could steal just like a few moments after she's
yeah,
done, ask her to,
yeah, of
you know,
course.
like a little thumbnail. Um,
Absolutely.
you
Um,
sure you don't mind? I would pay
no, no,
her.
no, I
I
would
don't,
love, I would love for you to have it. No, I think it's great. And we have to connect back to each other. My SEO person explained the whole thing to me.
oh, with connecting us to social media. I know you call her an intern. I'm sure she is your intern and you're giving her credit. I have like, I don't know, I have like 3 virtual assistants because I can't do anything. I have somebody who does my billing, then I have somebody who does my social media, then I have somebody who also does things like I think I told you I'm dyslexic. So did I tell you that?
You did mention it. Yeah, because we talked about your book. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, yeah, I did mention it. Anyway, so if I have to write a letter for somebody, I'll just say like, write me a letter for this college student who needs whatever special accommodation, like just do it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, we'd be happy. No, I want you to, sure, take pieces or, that would be great. That would be great.
All righty. And let's stay in touch. I loved, just thank you. I just really appreciate it. You don't know how many people like just would just like be so dismissive. And I appreciate the
Yeah.
attention you're
No,
paying.
I'm excited. I'm in, really, really, it's really, your book is really great. I really love it and I'm really happy to, promote it and, get this together.
I'm happy to. It's not for me about making money. What am I going to make? 2 cents on every copy. It's ridiculous. But it's not about that. It's just about really people opening their tolerance, their window of tolerance towards the work.
And understanding, I mean, I don't know, because now I don't follow it as much, but that, Brooklyn and Beyond, there's like 2 or 3 thousand therapists on there or something. And someone posted like, oh, I have a question, someone in my client's family died. Should kids be allowed to go to the funeral? And like therapists don't even know. And I remember reading that and being like, yeah, in my mind, I don't, but it's like people don't know this. We have to really get the word out, it's really important.
Wrote to her. I write to people a lot, like, and I think they dismiss it, but because it's like that's her client. I think people get very territorial
They
because
do.
the truth of the matter is that's her client. But basically, I can't tell her all of this. I can't like, you know what I mean? If you asked me for your client, I'd say, well, do you feel comfortable? First of all, like ideally consult that, let them do a one-off, right? But then that's threat, not to you, but that would be threatening to her.
People get very
Um,
territorial. I know.
right.
Really
And I
upset.
send the corresponding material to the website or other books. And I just think people are like, oh yeah, 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 I can do that. And then I don't mean to be disrespectful, but no, no, I don't think so.
Well, it's very hard because grief and death and dying is its own thing. And I think a lot of therapists who specialize in depression and anxiety, and they're really good at what they do, but they don't have the training and they don't know. But people, it doesn't get, I don't think, the respect that it should get because it really is a specialty. And I hear you, people get very territorial.
And I 100% agree with you. If I had a broken leg, I would not go to an obstetrician.
Well, I mean, I did a consultation with a client and she said, I love your style and your approach. And, we were talking about that stuff. And then she said, just so you know, someone in my life very close to me has borderline personality disorder. And I was like, I'm probably not the right therapist for you. If this person is close, I just don't know that much about it. And there's other therapists who really like specialize in that. I'm not, and so
Right.
and then she, good luck, and she found someone else who's special. But for some reason, when it comes to grief and death and dying, I feel like every therapist thinks that they can do it. And I'm like, it's not the same as everything else. It's different.
I think as the guidance counselor cried. It's like,
I know that story horrified me. Oh my God. That
he's,
was, yeah.
he's such a little love. He's so, I mean, I'm in touch with him, he's such a honey bunny. And yeah.
No, that story also, I was like, oh my gosh, that's really inappropriate on so many levels and not helpful either.
Oh,
But
that's exactly what he said. She wasn't helpful. No, she wasn't helpful. But
yeah,
but
I
yeah,
always, yeah, when I'm training people, I'm like, your grief cannot be more than the other person's grief. This is not about you. That is like completely, like you said, enmeshment and unprofessional. Like, anyway, yeah, you and I are on the same page.
well, you have the experience and the clinical authority. You're not intimidated, right? Like you're not a young, I mean, you're
Yeah.
young, but you're not.
No, I'm really not. I'm really
Well,
not. That's okay.
you have a body of knowledge with which you feel confident. And I think that some newer therapists may not have that. And I don't write about Mary's story, but I think you might love it. But Mary's story is in another article. But I do write about being at her funeral and just I couldn't stop crying. Like, but I worked with her for like 7 years and I loved her. But that was the only time I think I've ever cried. But it was totally appropriate.
I mean, look, I've gotten teary-eyed with clients before. Sometimes it is hard. But I mean, yeah, 7 years is a long time. That's
Yeah. I don't tell these stories without also becoming, I mean, every story I just told you, I'm affected by it. I don't have a black heart.
no, no, you couldn't do this work. But as you said, that healthy boundary is like, yeah, I remember reading that about that guidance counselor, and I was like, yeah,
Yep,
yeah.
yep. All right, my dear.
Thank you. All right, so I'm gonna send this to my intern, but if anything you want to send us, please do. Please, please. Thank you. All right. Have a great day.
Yeah, thank you again. Bye.